Hey everyone, Chris here, your mentor at the Lorcana Tutor. Today we are going over our next part in our series where we break down the inks, and today we're covering Ruby, speed and bravery to defy the odds. We have three unique keywords to Ruby: evasive, rush, and reckless, which we'll go over a little bit later in the video. But when I think of Ruby, I think of unconditional removal. Ever since set 1, it's been a design space that Ravensburger's really pushed, with I think one of the biggest cards being this Be Prepared that has the ability to just banish all characters. There are a lot of decks that are built around Ruby and built around this card specifically, so if you get to like the mid game and you play this, then you try to stabilize from there. We do see banish effects on single action cards like Dragonfire. We see them attached to bodies like this big Maleficent dragon, and all of them have been proved to be pretty strong at certain points in the game's lifespan. And then they started exploring this idea where your opponent chooses and banishes one of their characters. That, again, is still seeing play. The Lady Tremaine is still a pretty common card. And the reason that we see that is it's really good to help deal with like ward characters. If they have a single character on the board, you can just get rid of it right away. And really it comes down to like if there are blue decks that are playing Tamatoas, this is the easiest way for a lot of Ruby decks to deal with it. So we have this unconditional removal that just says banish characters. And then we also have this little more conditional removal, but it still is proving to be really, really strong, that cares about banishing characters that have a certain strength or less. So I think the most prominent one right now is Madame Medusa, and maybe Brawl too. So Brawl is just a cheap action that says you can banish any character with 2 or less. So this is great for dealing with Hirems. It's great for dealing with Diablos, opposing Flynn Rider. Sometimes you even take out a rabbit or something like that. And then later on in the game, we have the Madame Medusa that is the same effect, but with 3 strength, and it's also on a body. So this makes cards like the Beast Tragic Hero, the Robin Hood Champion of Sherwood, anything with 3 or lower strength, the ability to just get rid of it right away. And of course, you know, if you've done any exploring of cards or seen any like new reveals, there's a meme within the community: dies to Medusa if it has 3 or less strength. You have to be considerate of that. We have another big Sisu, which gets rid of all opposing characters with 2 strength or less. This can be really good when you're pairing it up with ice blocks or things that you can manipulate your opponent's character strength, and it acts like a one-sided Be Prepared, right? So Be Prepared gets rid of all characters, but this one only does your opponent's characters, but with a little bit of a caveat. And we see the next version of that, the Sisu, where you can get rid of something with 1 strength or less. So I think that this removal and being able to just get rid of a character with either no conditions or very limited conditions is one of the things that makes Ruby really strong, and probably the thing that's most defining about Ruby. We also talked about how there are rush characters, and these rush characters have proved to be very strong, especially when they're on bigger bodies, because they allow you to deal with something right away. And most of the time, you can get like a 2-for-1 for them. So the Maui, again, has been introduced in set 1. And since set 1, it's been a staple. Most decks play 4 of this Maui. Just the ability to have a 6/5 come out that you can challenge something right away, whether it's a character or we're seeing a lot of like saving them for locations, is really strong. We started seeing the Scar, which does something a little bit similar. It does have the ability to quest later on in the game, but also if you're going against like an aggressive deck, you can just take out a lot of little characters here and there, and that can be really, really strong. Almost, flavorful that it could be like a one-sided Be Prepared. And then we saw this item be introduced in some of the Ruby Sapphire decks, so the ability to give a character rush, and it also gives +2 strength this turn. So really how I think about this is people need to deal with the Queen's Castle location. If you have this down, you can play this on turn 1. Once you get to 6 ink, you could play your Maui and then give it rush and +2, and you can deal with it. Obviously, the Maui already has rush, but you can give something with 5 strength the ability to take out the Queen's Castle in one go. We also see a little less frequently, but we see this Goofy Super Goof. It has rush and the ability whenever this character challenges another character, you gain 2 lore. So it almost acts like a Merlin Goat, where you get lore kind of out of nowhere with a little bit more of a condition of needing to be able to challenge another character, but most of the time that's not too hard to meet. Ruby has also started to get this archetype of caring about how big or how much strength someone has, more so on your own side. And we started to see this mainly with Flynn Rider, where at the start of your turn, if you have a character with more strength than each opposing character, you gain 3 lore. On its own, it's not super strong, but when you pair it up, I put this card in here with Sisu on turn 3, where this character gets +1 strength for each card in opponent's hands. This turns out to be a very strong opener for Ruby decks, and most decks don't have a way to get a character out there that would have more strength than the Sisu when you get to your turn 4. So it's really easy for this Flynn to generate a couple of lore. I would say it's something that most players are aware of now, and even in the deck that runs it the most frequently, I think there's starting to be more discussion on if it's worth keeping in the deck. It's really good against slower decks that maybe are just trying to ramp up, but other decks have more answers for it. In our newest set, we were introduced to Maximus, which has a similar effect, but it's at the end of our turn. If we have any characters in play with 5 strength or more, you gain 2 lore. Or if we have any characters in play with 10 strength or more, we gain 5 lore instead. And I've seen some people play this more on like a local level, and it's definitely a threat to be posed. But I think it's a really cool design space to explore. And we see something similar to that with Snuggly Duckling. This one hasn't really seen too much play. I just like the idea of it, where if you have a character with 3 or more strength and it challenges, you gain a lore, and if it has 6 or more strength, you gain 3 lore instead. It needs to be at the location, so it's a little bit slow, a little bit clunky to kind of get. But just seeing this overall design philosophy of, oh, let's have more strength, and if you have more strength than your opponent, you're going to get rewarded for it in some sense. So these, I think, are the 3 main archetypes that Ruby has in its design space. And so some of the most popular decks that use Ruby is Ruby Amethyst. This is, we just talked about this in our Amethyst video, but it's been probably one of the most consistent decks since set 1, and the ability to draw cards, get to the later game with something like Be Prepared, your Madame Medusas, and control the board, and then win by putting down castles, by bouncing goats, and all that kind of stuff has just been proved to be really, really strong, consistent as the game has gone on. We've added in the Flynn Rider Sisu combo for some early game pressure, but like I was saying, I think there's been a little bit more discussion on, do we just run things that draw us more cards? Do we run some more the later removal? Where does this deck start to go to attack the meta? And that's, I think, the one thing with this deck is that it can really adapt to what other decks are being played around it. But it doesn't, the most unfair thing it can do is, play a Be Prepared to play down its couple Queen's Castles. Other than that, it has the standard bounce package. Another deck that has really come into its own, I think the last couple sets, is this Ruby Sapphire. Right now, at the end of the set 5 meta, I think a lot of people are still considering this to be the strongest deck. The ability to ramp way faster than your opponent, get to 7 ink. Again, sometimes I've seen it by turn 4, turn 5, and being able to get off an early Be Prepared, and then you're starting at square one. Both of you guys are starting at square one, and the cards in this on average are going to be a lot stronger than other decks. It's just it's a powerhouse of a deck. And this was from Top 32 DLC Birmingham, and again, really, really strong, using the removal package of Ruby paired up with the ramp package of Sapphire. Now, those are really the 2, I think, strongest decks. If we look at, any of these big tournaments, most of the decks are, I think actually all of the decks that included Ruby were those 2 decks. There is one that we're going to look at a little bit later that I think is just really fun, that did make day 2 at Vegas, but we're going to just look at some of the other design spaces that seem to be consistent in Ruby. So this one is the idea that we get benefits for having our own characters damaged. So we started seeing this in set 2, where we would have characters that were overstated but had damage on them. So effectively, when you play as Mother Gothel, she's a 3/1, but she can be healed by any effect, but really where we saw it was by the Amber Rapunzel. So you would heal it for 3, draw 3 cards. Proves to be a pretty strong combo. We saw Teeth and Ambitions that saw a decent amount of play when it came out, where you deal 2 damage to one of your characters to deal 2 damage to another character. Hydra, where whenever it deals damage, you can deal that much damage to something else. And then a couple of new things introduced in this newest set, Shimmering Skies, where we have this Gaston that has cost reduction for each damage character that you have in play. And then this Wreck-It Ralph, which will gain you lore for each damage on him. There are some other cards that have these mechanics in them, but this is just the handful of cards I chose. But again, I continue to explore, go on Dreamborn, look at all the cards. There's a lot of really cool stuff that they've come up with. And then next is the Evasive. We talked about how this is one of the keywords unique to Ruby. From set 1, we saw it on Mickey Mouse. There's some other things with like Pongo and I think Tigger or Goofy. I think one of the most prominent ones in the past was this Minnie Mouse stylish surfer that I think really warped the meta for a little bit. It was being run in Ruby Amethyst, and if you got it down on turn 3 and your opponent didn't have a way to deal with it, you could easily get 4 or 6 lore from it, and that usually would be enough to get you to the end. We have this Ruby location that gives all of your characters evasive, and then also this Vanellope von Schweetz that was introduced in the newest set that has evasive right when you play her, so she can come out, rush, and challenge something really good for taking out Diablo, and then the next turn she just is a 3/3 that costs for 2. And I think one of the things we're starting to see more is the importance that the Ruby Inc. is placing on locations, and specifically moving to locations. So we got, when locations came out, we got this Jim Hawkins that I think still has the potential to be a very strong card. It lets you play a location with cost 4 or less for free. Anytime you can do something for free, that's going to be really strong. And as there are more and more locations introduced, I think it only gets stronger. And you get to move Jim Hawkins there for free right when you play that location. We see that idea of being able to move stuff for free as well from this Tuk Tuk. Again, I think the more locations that get introduced into this game, the more that cards like this become beneficial. And once there are locations that have really strong effects but high move costs, you're going to get a lot of free ink value from doing this, which is definitely something to look out for and to start brewing with if you see a location that you really like, seeing if something like these cards can work in that. We also, in this newest set, started to see a little bit more of an aggressive side of moving to locations, where this Taffeta is whenever this character moves to a location, you can gain 2 lore. Happens once per turn. But again, very flavorfully, they had this Sugar Rush Speedway, where it's 0 to move there, so you can move her there, gain 2 lore. And then next turn you could exert her and put a damage on her and then move her somewhere else. And so there's a lot of really cool stuff I think that they've put in place. And as the game goes on and we start to get more locations, I think that these will hopefully start to see more play. But the next couple decks that we're looking at, I think, are some more rogue decks, we'll call them. Some decks that definitely saw a lot of play in the past. Maybe not so much in this current metagame of Shimmering Skies, but I think are still decks to be noteworthy of. So this first one is the Mufasa deck. So it's an Amber Ruby deck. The idea is that you're playing, this one is all characters, because Mufasa, whenever he dies, you get a character. You can play the top character from your deck. And we're seeing some of the idea here, some of the other aspects that we were talking about, right? So we're playing that Mother Gothel. We're also playing the Mulan. Both of them are damaged characters, which give you targets for your Rapunzel heal, so you can draw cards. You got the Hydra in there just to help deal with the board. And then we're playing, some of the Medusas, the Maleficents, the characters that can control the board when they come down. And really, that's the game plan. You have a little bit of the aggressiveness from the Amber, but I think these Mufasa decks are always kind of like a little bit of a cult following. People love them, and for some reason, it's just fallen off. I think the having to fit into the mold of the Mufasa of just like only playing characters probably restricts a little bit of the strength that the color combinations can do, but I think it's still a really fun deck to play. And the last one I want to talk about, this is actually a deck that made day 2. I think it's a really, really cool deck that is more focused around the locations. So we see this Jim Hawkins, we see the aggressive line of the Flynn Rider and the Sisu. We're seeing the Goofy to gain some extra lore. One of the things we didn't talk about was this Prince Eric is a 2/2 that quests for 2, but whenever this character is banished, you may banish another chosen character. Again, really good for getting early aggressive questing, or you can challenge it into one thing and banish another thing. But the whole idea with this deck is you're going to get these locations down. The RLS Legacy we already talked about, giving your stuff evasive. This Dwarf Mine allows you to deal damage to characters anytime you move a character there. So if it's a non-knight character, then you would deal 1 damage. But if it's a knight character, like this Happy or this Doc, then you would deal 2 damage. And clearly they found success with it. I haven't played with this yet at all, but it looks like a super cool deck. I like the idea of these 2 colors together, and I'm glad someone has found success with it because we haven't really seen it up to this point. And then another win condition is this John Silver that allows you to gain resist +1 and an additional lore for each location that you have. So putting down locations, getting a little bit of aggressive early, and then maybe stalling out your opponent with Pete and all that kind of stuff. But again, really, really cool. We're seeing Ruby in a bunch of different colors. And so there's definitely options if this is something that is interesting to you. Now, just to give a little overview of Ruby, the pros of it, I think that it has probably some of the best removal tools, and a great reason to play it is just to play the card Be Prepared. To kind of tie it together with the third point here, I think having a Be Prepared type card in your deck is very forgiving to play. So for example, for me, I've played Ruby Amethyst in set 1. I recently started messing around with Amethyst Steel and found it to be a lot more difficult because people said that it played the same way, but being able to have a Be Prepared in your deck, you can kind of mess up a little bit, and then if they overextend or they get a big board state, you just play Be Prepared and everyone's kind of back at level 1. Another, I think, really strong thing about Ruby is its ability to deal with locations. I think that if we took that out, obviously it's an important part of the game, that locations could really run rampant, and a lot of the reasons that they're maybe pulled back a little bit is because you have your Maui, you have the Vitalisphere, you have things that you can easily set up a 1-turn kill, and it just kills the tempo of the person playing the location. Some of the negatives of just playing just Ruby is I think the card draw is very, very limited. Most of the time, you'll have to pair it up with other colors. I think that's why the top 2 decks are Amethyst and Sapphire, because they both have 2 of the strongest draw engines in the game, so it helps support the color. And kind of like what we talked about with Amethyst, I think that the removal package is so strong that it kind of pigeonholes you into what you can do with the colors, or like what is the most effective thing to do with these colors. And we talked about that with Amethyst, like I was saying, and I think that's part of the reason why, Zan called Ruby Amethyst a Build-A-Bear deck or whatever, is because both of those colors, I think, just have cards that are, or packages that are stronger than everything else that's been printed so far. So you just take those 2 together, you put it together, and it's like, okay, that's what that is. But again, I think that it's still really fun to play. I love playing the style of removal and being able to really deal with my opponent's board as it goes on. Now remember, all of the cards that I talked about are a mere snapshot of what Ruby has to offer. Again, I was looking mostly at the decks that are the most competitively viable at the moment, but there are a lot of really, really cool cards and a lot of room to brew up something that really speaks to you. I think sometimes it's easy for a player that's in the competitive mindset to just focus on those cards, but a lot of people just like having fun brewing with their favorite characters or their favorite cards or anything like that. Like, for example, this Shere Khan is one of my favorite cards, and unfortunately it's never really seen any meta play, but I would love to just kind of have a deck that incorporates this to just to have for fun. So please check out all that Ruby has to offer. Thank you so much for watching this video, and keep an eye out for our next video going over Sapphire. Thank you.